Glenn Youngkin has been elected as governor in Virginia. Whatever you think of Glenn Youngkin, his election was surely aided by rival groups sending pretend racists to smear him last week. Is it any wonder we're losing faith in politics when all these theatrical pranks are going on? Hello there, you 4 million cherubins. I'm sending you love and giving you truth, I hope, or as best as I can understand it. Glenn Youngkin has been elected as Virginia's next governor days after the Lincoln Project was condemned for a stunt targeting the Republican in which it sent people mimicking white nationalists to stand outside his campaign bus. It's a strange, theatrical and unnecessary prank to pull, isn't it? Because we know that there is such a thing as racism. We know there is such a thing as white supremacy, but in general, most people, as best as they can, are trying to pull together and create good lives for themselves, their families and their communities. You don't need external forces stoking divisions from any side of the political spectrum. Terry McAuliffe aides were quick to tweet out a photo, one declaring, "This is who Glenn Youngkin supporters are," and another calling it disgusting and disqualifying for the Republican. Now, I'm sure that if I were to look into Glenn Youngkin, there'll be plenty of things that he believes in and agrees with that I am totally against. I bet there are loads of things because I'm politically as far as you can get from being Republican, I would say. But what I do believe in is free speech, authenticity, and people having the right to choose whatever political solutions they want. And I also believe that power should be as close to people as possible. And when you get to a point where the party posing as the goodies are sending out bogus white nationalists at such a sensitive time, I mean, that's outrageous. There's no upside to that. Consultants at the Lincoln Project were among those defending its actions. How can you defend that? How could you defend? Yeah, but all right, we did send some pretend white supremacists, but there are real white supremacists, but those real white supremacists are wily and sly and keeping out of the way. I lost faith in politics a long time ago. How can there be all that pomposity and grandeur on the TV and the seriousness of the punditry, people writing, PhDs? Look at what it comes down to. It's like school children stuff.
The men reportedly approached Youngkin's bus saying, "We're all in for Glenn." But will they burn the candidate they were trying to help?
I think the whole episode around the tiki torches was pretty unpleasant and ugly. And ordinary people from different cultural or racial backgrounds with different identities turning on one another is one of the things that upsets me most about modern cultural life. We have so much more in common than we have that separates us. There are doubtless conversations that have to be had about race, class, inequality in all sorts of areas. And I think people trying to score political points, trying to get a candidate into office using the paraphernalia and imagery of a tense and fraught time is pretty unpleasant. For example, think about how liberal left media is responding around the Let's Go Brandon thing, which I think has an air of lightness. It's not such a visceral, that Tiki Torches moment was nasty. I don't think that's got any place anywhere. And dragging up Trump, man, the whole time, I don't know that this is a good way to progress, whilst I recognise that Trump did advocate for this particular candidate. And certainly, I'm not coming at this from a perspective of, oh, Youngkin, he might be the future. The only thing I can think of is his name rhymes with pumpkin.
In a state where Biden beat Trump by 10 percentage points, many are viewing the contest as a bellwether for Democrats in the midterms and possibly beyond, and another referendum on Trumpism. Since getting the nomination, Youngkin has been keeping the former president at arm's length, but the torchbearers were trying to force the issue. Polls have them neck and neck.
Right, we now know that Youngkin won, and we also know that Virginia's badge is someone standing on top of another person in a moment of weird Grecian triumph. The point that I'd like to draw your attention to are the cycles of politics, the pledges and promises that are frequently made and seldom fulfilled that we can already see playing out in the Biden administration, and I would say the former administration was no better. Let's have a look at some historical examples using a piece of writing from that right-wing fascist hate rag, The Guardian in England. David Sirota wrote, amid the 2008 financial pandemic, there was a glimmer of something better. Barack Obama, who had campaigned on an inspiring promise to bring a new era of responsibility and accountability to Wall Street and Washington, I was excited. I was in America, your country, at that time. And I've got to tell you, I got a little bit swept up in it. I didn't mean leave the sofa or anything, stand up and start jumping around. But I thought, oh, this is cool, man. Look at this lovely family, African-American family in the White House. This has got to be a good thing for healing America. This is going to be a president who's going to care about diversity. He's going to care about inequality, not just for African-Americans who are economically dispossessed, but for white people, people of all colours that are dispossessed. Bring about a little bit of fairness, justice, make the American dream a reality by giving people access to the instruments of power. I didn't think it for very long though, and this article demonstrates why I was right not to. Obama had helped the Bush administration forge the Troubled Asset Relief Program. That's a nice name for it, isn't it? The Troubled Asset Relief Program. If you dive into what went down around that time, it was people making irresponsible bets. It was people endorsing deals that they knew were dodgy as fuck. The whole thing was basically crime. It was crime within the bounds of the law. And they deal with it with a whole, oh, we better get the Troubled Asset Relief Program. What that means is everything's been annihilated, but we are so exposed by this, we're going to have to hold it together, and that will be at the expense of ordinary people. But if we give it a nice name like the Troubled Asset Relief Program, perhaps no one will notice. Soon after, the Wall Street bankrolled Obama administration scaled back its economic stimulus plan, backed off its promise to reform bankruptcy laws, refused to prosecute bankers, abandoned legislation to limit the size of too big to fail banks, and allowed bailout money to subsidize lavish executive bonuses. I think it's the last one that causes most offense. Lavish executive bonuses. They weren't even moderate. Lavish, with a fling of the wrist, thusly. Now, anyone that's been awake and alive long enough to have seen how that played out will be susceptible to different political ideologies and models, even if they're purely rhetorical. If political figures and movements emerge where people say, drain the swamp, you can't trust these people, they make all these promises and they don't come good on them, what, is that an unreasonable thing to say? Or is that a very appealing thing to hear? The top 10% of income earners saw their fortunes rise by 27% during Obama's presidency. That compares, doesn't it, to the increase in wealth of the most wealthy during the pandemic period. Do you see how things are going? Do you see how the system is behaving? Do you see that focusing your attention on figures like Joe Biden, Donald Trump, anyone that operates within the system is ultimately unhelpful, because the system can sustain the fluctuations of individual political figures, because there are entrenched institutions and systemic ideologies that do not alter as a result of a tiki torch here or a bit of nationalist rhetoric there. These are deep entrenched systems that know how to preserve themselves, and one of the main ways they preserve themselves is by turning us against one another on the basis of somewhat spurious ideas, even though I have nothing but respect for civil rights struggles as much as I can understand them. The top 10% saw their fortunes rise, but every other stratum saw income decline, and countless neighbourhoods were eviscerated by more than 6 million foreclosures. If that was caused by hurricanes or weather, it would be a massive disaster. It was caused by economics, which I don't want to sound like an ignoramus, but you have to acknowledge it's a construct, it's conceptual, it's manageable. You can redefine it. You can, as Roosevelt in your country famously did, offer a new fair deal to ordinary people. You can continually be in negotiation around the welfare of ordinary folk. These experiences, repeated ad nauseum as Wall Street executives swelled their stock portfolios, convinced many to view the past promises of hope and change as a ruse. Why would you not? I once met someone who had worked within the Obama administration, and he espoused how hard Obama worked. And he said, whatever you think about politics and the corruption and deception and duplicity, you can't dispute that when you see them work, they're working really hard. And I sort of don't doubt that. And I don't have time or the inclination to condemn any individuals. It's not what interests me. It just makes me realise that however whooped up and zooped up you get about an individual, ultimately they're going to let you down because they're going to be operating within systems that preserve themselves at all costs. It's naive to care about the individual characters in the soap opera of contemporary politics. For today's Democrats, the takeaway is, when America votes for hope and change and is instead force-fed more of the same, the backlash can be swift. A dozen years later, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said at the outset of the Biden presidency that we will not repeat that mistake of watering down legislation. But let's see what really happened. However, much of the direct aid in child tax credit legislation has been stalled, cut off, or scheduled for expiration, even as nearly 1 in 5 households lost all of their savings during the pandemic. Worse, Biden and the Democrats have been considering big cuts to their already scaled-back package of housing, anti-poverty and climate initiatives. They've also pondered defanging provisions to reduce drug prices and considered adding means testing and work requirements that could make direct aid more difficult to access. All that is they rolled back on all their promises. When you watch any of them talk, I think the stuff they say is like really beautiful. Whether it's like Theresa May, former Prime Minister in my country, Bill Clinton, George Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump. The rhetoric is always appealing because they say stuff that they know we need to hear. We're going to build a better country for you as an individual where you, your family and your community will come together and succeed, where people from all backgrounds will be able to achieve something in America that stands for ordinary people against corporations. They'll just say that stuff all day long. But once they're in, right, get rid of that tax credit thing. Yeah, we're not going to do that anti-poverty or climate initiative. We're scaling back. That's what happens all the time. So why should you vote? Why should you care? Why should you get excited? It's obvious that emotive cultural issues are brought to the forefront to inspire passion because it's impossible to be passionate otherwise, because we've had the experience of the blag for the last 30, 40, 50 years. So that you have to be stoked up on wild, visceral fear and desire. Otherwise, you would quite rightly, sensibly and rationally turn your back on these corrupt, defunct systems and start thinking about alternatives. Taken together, it feels like 2009 all over again. Billionaires are doing better than ever, while more and more Americans are getting economically pulverized. Nice language. And simmering with rage. Just a year out from the midterm election, the latest polls show Biden's approval rating plummeting, with particular erosion among Democratic constituencies who were promised change but seem to be feeling they're only getting more of the same. And what solutions are being offered? If you hear people shouting, "Let's go Brandon," for God's sake, stamp that out. Stamp out the symptoms of people's dissatisfaction and never deal with the problem of the dissatisfaction and what's causing it. Until we become willing to forgive and love one another, turn to spiritual values instead of phony political values, we're not going to make any progress, and it's going to be something that requires all of us together to get in conversation, and it's a conversation that I'd like to start right now with you in the comments. What do you want to see change? What do you want to happen? What do you think about this particular story? How do you feel about those two individual parties? What political figures inspire hope and change in you? If you enjoyed this video, have a look at this one. And if you want to sign up and learn a little bit of meditation, please subscribe to my Awakening side channel. I do all sorts of spiritual stuff there. You'll love it. Very important to me that you subscribe to my mailing list, where I tell you about the books I read, how I keep myself awake and active, and a big part of that is by listening to you. Stay free.